What's up, everybody? We got a bunch of news today. It is November 17th, 2024, and today officially Biden has allowed Ukraine to use U.S. arms to strike directly back inside of Russia. Biden lifts ban on Ukraine using U.S. weapons to strike deeper into Russia. Officials have suggested permission for wider use could be response to North Koreans joining war on Putin's side. Joe Biden has lifted the ban on Ukraine using long-range missiles to fire into Russian territory by permitting them to be used against Russian and North Korean forces in the Kursk region, a decision being justified by the presence of North Korean troops fighting alongside Russia against Ukraine. So what they're saying is they're doing this because it's intended to send a message to North Korea. The first strikes using U.S. rockets could come within the next few days. The decision is not thought to apply to UK-supplied Storm Shadow missiles. It seems like the Biden administration is just trying to stir things up as much as possible before Trump gets into office right now, and this is a massive move, a really, really bad move as well, heading further and further to a larger scale conflict here by allowing this, by lifting the ban here. With North Korea getting involved, now this happening, Trump is going to have a lot on his plate, especially when it comes to getting things sorted out here. Poland and NATO allies scrambled jets to safeguard its airspace and border areas early on Sunday. They returned to their air bases 3 hours later without incident. Moldova said Russian drones and missiles had violated its airspace. A lot of crazy things happening over there right now. Let's get into... We have Trudeau's experience with Trump at the APEC summit a few days ago. Let's take a look at this.
There you go.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau appeared to make it work with Donald Trump. He avoided a prolonged tariff war, and he signed a new trade deal. That experience makes him a valuable commodity now. At the two summits of world leaders Trudeau will attend over the next week.
My guess is that many other countries' leaders are going to be asking Trudeau about how he managed the Trump administration the first time around.
Senior Canadian government officials confirmed as much in a background briefing this week, telling reporters, quote, absolutely, Donald Trump's election will change some of the conversations. Canadian officials expect world leaders will focus on Trump's promises, on tariffs, on the war in Ukraine, NATO, and global security.
All I can think about is how poorly Trudeau actually did when Trump was in his first term of presidency. Trump says he rejected meeting with Canada's Trudeau. This was back in October of 2018. There's actually a few articles from back in that time range there, the 2016 to 2020 range, of Trump consistently bashing Trudeau. It's going to be interesting how he handles this next year or so, especially with the upcoming election. 2025 is going to be a very big year for Canada, and with Trump, basically, he's going to be destroying Trudeau nonstop here. With the tariffs, with the trade deals. It's going to be a never-ending sob story for Trudeau. We have another thing going on here. I believe this is the APEC summit in Peru. This happened a few days ago. We have Mary Ng sitting beside Trudeau, one of the names that was announced on the list of foreign interference, but she, for some reason, still sits in the cabinet in Parliament with no actions taken against her. I guess the allegations could have been false, but we're still waiting to see exactly what's happening. Members all across the board, Conservative, NDP, Bloc, Liberal, they have all failed to call her out on this list in her name being a part of it, so I don't know what's going on with that. But let's take a listen here. I believe Trudeau is going to talk a little more about Trump.
Agree more. So from here you go to the G20, and I know this isn't about the G20, but I would be really remiss if I didn't ask you about the elephant in the room, which is my election, or the election in my country, the United States of America. And I know behind the scenes everybody's kind of talking about that. Could you just give us some insight? Because, you know, as you said, obviously there are people that feel deprived in the United States, which is how we've ended up in this path. But, you know, what's being discussed potentially is going to turn trade governance upside down. So maybe a little bit of your perspective.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, when Donald Trump first got elected in 2016, he made a commitment to rip up one of the most successful trade deals that the world has ever seen, NAFTA, or specifically Canada-US free trade deal particularly. And that was, something he was absolutely determined to do, and it would have had deep, deep consequences, obviously on Canada, but also on the North American economy. We rolled up our sleeves and did the hard work of demonstrating that it was not just possible, but desirable to create a win-win, to update NAFTA, to update USMCA in all sorts of different ways. And the level of connectedness between the Canadian and the American economy, to be specific about that, meant that it would have been very, very difficult for the American administration to do something that would hurt the Canadian economy and hurt workers that wouldn't also significantly hurt the American economy and American workers.
Trump is on a F around and find out playbook. Okay, that's how he does this. We saw what happened in his first term, and we still have a weak, incompetent leader in Trudeau, and I do not see a second term with the 47th, the 45th, 47th coming back being any better than it was before, especially because Trump needs to double down, quadruple down on everything he has said he is going to do, fixing the economy, sending the illegals away, whatever he promised he was going to do, he needs to pull through with it. Canada is also failing to pay on multiple areas up front. Trump has called this out now numerous times. If people aren't going to pay, the United States is going to drop massive tariffs. You're going to find out. Essentially, Trudeau is shitting his pants right now. He knows what exactly Trump did in his first term, and now that he's back for round two, ready to strike even harder than he did before, he's got a better team around him. He's got a smarter team around him. He's got a team that's willing to work for him and back him versus throwing him under the bus when the time comes. Trudeau, his own cabinet, is trying to fire him and remove him from office. There's no strength there in the Liberal government. It is collapsing. And a second term with Trump right now is probably going to be the final nail in the coffin for Trudeau, if I had to guess. We got some crazy stuff going on here. This actually happened in Canada.
Unlocking his garage door, Luc Bruneau dropped his keys in a pile of leaves.
At that moment, I tried to pick them up, and I felt a terrible pain in my hand. At the time, I didn't know what it was. And then I had to look at it, and I saw that I had a needle fully inserted in my hand.
Bruneau went to his rental property on Du Havre Street near Metro Frontenac last Wednesday morning. When he arrived, two men were injecting drugs in front of the garage. He assumes the used needle was theirs because he says they came back and said, "You found what we are looking for," and pulled it out of his hand.
I froze. It's one of the rare times in my life I could not say a word. I could not say anything.
Bruneau rushed to the hospital with this gash in his hand and a strange feeling. He says doctors told him he was probably injected with fentanyl. The cut is healing and he is on...
My God, imagine the doctors saying that to you. You go to pick up your keys off the ground and a stray needle hits your hand. You've most likely been injected with fentanyl. Oh my God, dude. This is absolutely awful. And this is just the sad reality right now of Canada. I hope this guy gets better or doesn't get or catch anything from this. Vile, absolutely disgusting. Major breaking news coming out of Colombia. Why the hell is this only happening now? What are you guys doing over there in Colombia? That's a major victory. That's a major victory right there. My God, the fact that this is only happening now. So Trudeau wants to sit there and blame Canadians for climate change or environmental issues or whatever and impose this massive tax, which makes living just a tax. In the last 10 days, Justin Trudeau has traveled 7,200 kilometers to and from Vancouver, 3,500 kilometers to and from Bermuda. And basically, yeah, the list goes on here of where he's traveled to, burning almost 300,000 liters of jet fuel. And yet, yeah, we're the ones that are the issue. Interesting stuff. And by the way, here's a fantastic video of him landing in Peru and the media calling his daughter his wife. Yeah, great stuff. A little throwback to question period of last week. Tomorrow, question period returns, so that should be very exciting.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Join in my honourable colleagues' sending of condolences, but we are witnessing economic vandalism in real time. Last Thursday, this government was briefed that the only sector of the Canadian economy actually producing any growth was the energy sector. And what did they do today? They slapped a punishing cap on Canadian production.
Exactly.
All this will do is chase investments and jobs to other countries. But that's something this Prime Minister is good at. He's increased Canadian investment into the U.S. by $63 billion last year alone. So will the Prime Minister stop fueling the U.S. economy, cancel his tax hikes, and cancel the production cap to bring those investment dollars back home?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, we were very pleased to announce an emissions cap with respect to the oil and gas sector in this country. Given that oil and gas constitutes 31% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, it is important that we work with the sector to reduce emissions, just as we do with every sector. It is also true that as we move towards a lower carbon economy across the world, oil and gas produced with the lowest emissions is actually going to have value around the world. We are moving forward with a plan to address climate change and build a strong economy going forward. They are stuck in the past and ignoring the science of climate.
Before I get to the honourable member, I'm just going to ask the honourable member from Calgary Centre, please, to hold on until his question is turned to ask.
Starting off early, Greg, aren't we?
Member from Regina Capel.
All this production cap will do is make other countries richer while making Canadians poorer. But that's something this Prime Minister is so good at. Consider this, GDP per capita in Canada, down. In the U.S., it's up. 9 years ago, average wages in the U.S. and Canada were almost identical. Now, an American worker brings home $22,000 more than their Canadian counterpart. And $500 billion in investments has fled Canada to the United States, creating bigger paychecks for American workers, all because of this Prime Minister's high taxes and massive deficits. The Prime Minister is the #1 job creator in the United States. So instead of helping the Canadian economy, why not fight for Canada for once?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the member opposite should take the time to actually read the information about the pollution cap. Production is forecast to increase 16% by 2030, Mr. Speaker. So this idea that we're somehow cutting production is simply not true.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, $500 million has left Canada for the U.S. The Conservatives will bring investment and jobs back to Canada. This Prime Minister's high taxes and deficits have helped the U.S. prosper while Canadians are desperately trying to house and feed themselves. A U.S. worker now earns $22,000 more than his Canadian counterpart. Will the Prime Minister keep abdicating his responsibilities? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker.
Oh, thank God it's not a real voice.
A patriotic Canadian woman, and I believe that we live in a wonderful country. I wouldn't want to be American. But if the Conservatives want to compare, well, this is what should be compared. Inflation is lower in Canada. The prime lending rate is lower in Canada. The average Canadian's lifespan is 4 years longer. So the Conservatives keep thinking the U.S. is better than Canada. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. What's worse is after 9 years of this Prime Minister, three different U.S. presidents, this government has been incapable of producing wealth in Canada. The gap between wealth is growing, whether it's the softwood lumber or the Buy American Act. This Prime Minister has failed miserably to protect Canadian workers. He's creating more jobs. He's the #1 job creator in the U.S. When will the Prime Minister stand up for Canada, cut taxes, and bring our money and our jobs and our investments back to Canada? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, once again, here's what we do better in Canada. Inflation is lower. The prime lending rate is lower. The average lifespan is longer. I will quote from David Rosenberg, a well-known economist. He said that last week, investors based in the U.S. should contemplate leaving New York for Toronto. And that's because he knows that Canadian companies are doing better. Who better to quote, Mr. Speaker?
Député de La Prairie.
The honourable member for La Prairie. On the eve of the U.S. elections, Peter Harder and other senators must not be blocking our bill to protect supply management in free trade deals, because we know that the U.S. wants to reopen the trade deal. This is not just harmful, it's dangerous because it will cause hundreds of thousands of job losses in Quebec. Will the Prime Minister stop threatening Quebec's farmers? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, being a farmer all my life and then being involved in the supply management system for all my agricultural career, I am fully aware of how valuable the supply management system is to this country. And I belong to a government and a party that has initiated supply management and continue to support supply management. And I can tell my honourable colleague in this country that this government will continue to support the supply management program.
The honourable member for La Prairie. The next U.S. president could open up NAFTA or the free trade deal in 2026. And depending who wins, it could be our supply management system that pays the price. So our farmers would like to hear their will respected. They don't want two unelected senators to hold up a bill to protect supply management. Will the Prime Minister stop those two senators from preventing C-282 from passing? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've already explained to our Bloc friends that senators are independent. And the other thing is that the Bloc admits that they can't protect supply management. The only people who can, because we truly want to and we're committed to doing so, is us. Whatever happens on the other side of the U.S. border, only a Liberal government will protect supply management here.
The honourable member from Burnaby South.
Uh-oh.
In Canada, we believe healthcare should be there when you need it, and it should be free. Today, Collège des médecins du Québec président was quoted saying that patients are typically told, I can do your surgery in 14 months. If you come to my private clinic, I can get it done in 1 month. It'll cost you $25,000. Dr. Grudeau says that's questionable, if not illegal. I think it's pretty clearly illegal. Does the Prime Minister agree?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Public, universal, available for all, and most of all, making sure that the patient doesn't pay. That we ensure in our country that when people come in for care, that they're taken care of on the basis of their need, not the size of their bank account. That's what distinguishes us from so many countries in the world. That is a principle that we stand up proudly for. I would suggest to the leader of the NDP, we've worked well together on things from pharmacare to dental care. There are many different challenges the provinces are presenting to health care right now, and certainly this party opposite, the Conservatives that would seek to ravage our health care system. Let's work together to make sure we protect it.
L'honorable député de Burnaby Sud.
The Liberals are letting people get charged to get to the front of the line. That should be illegal. Au Québec,
in Quebec, the private sector is taking up more and more of a role in healthcare. The Quebec College of Physicians and Surgeons is calling for this trend to be dealt with as quickly as possible. People who seek profit are causing longer delay times for healthcare. Why is the Prime Minister allowing U.S.-style companies to take advantage of Canadians suffering?
The Bloc was going to call a vote of non-confidence in Trudeau, but that came and went within seconds.
absolutely clear is that it's our government's priority to ensure that our healthcare system is universal and entirely public and available to all Canadians. We've made a lot of headway with dental care and pharmacare, but I think there's a lot of work that can still be done, that should still be done. But on the other side, the Conservative Party wants to cut. They want to make huge cuts to funding for healthcare, and that's totally unacceptable, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, almost 50% of young Canadians believe they will never own a home. This Liberal housing accelerator is an absolute joke. Common sense Conservatives have a plan. They're going to axe the GST on new home builds. On an $800,000 house, this will save $40,000. Wow. And the Conservative leader has now written to the premiers of every province asking them to match this tax cut. When will these NDP Liberals finally get it through their heads? They're funding bureaucracies, axe the tax on new builds so young people can buy a house.
The Bloc were waiting for the Liberals to hand over some sort of documents or sign some sort of legislation in, and I'm assuming the Liberals probably did it.
Speaker, has he consulted with his caucus? A dozen, probably more, Conservative members have advocated specifically for that program. They went behind the back of the Leader of the Opposition because they wanted to advocate for their constituents to see more homes built. By calling for the end of the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is how they would pay for this new bold idea, so-called, they would end support to communities for homelessness, they would end support for more building for middle-class Canadians. Mr. Speaker, it's an unacceptable, untenable position.
The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
Oh man, here's what Liberal housing advisor Mike P. Moffat said about the Liberal Housing Accelerator. Can anyone in the federal government tell me why Toronto deserves $471 million in housing accelerator funds to massively hike development taxes? And housing starts in Toronto are down 20%. Even Liberal advisors know the housing accelerator's a joke. Will these NDP Liberals finally realize they're funding bureaucracies, tripling development charges, and not getting any houses built for young Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Young Canadians, he talks about home building in Canada, Mr. Speaker. They have 6 homes to point to when they were in office. Wow. That's the sum total of their work when they were in office, when the Leader of the Opposition held the so-called role of Minister of Housing. He wasn't a minister at all, Mr. Speaker. In fact, if you look at the 190,000 number that they talk about during their time in office, that was home builders who did that, Mr. Speaker. It was not them. They know nothing about getting homes built. They know only about cuts. They would only make cuts to communities. It's not an acceptable position, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Parry Sound, Muskoka.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, we know they're not worth the cost of housing. So bad is their record, in fact, that 80% of young Canadians believe that home ownership is only for the very rich. Conservatives will axe the federal sales tax on new homes sold under $1 million, saving Canadians up to $50,000 or $2,200 a year in mortgage payments. The Conservative leader has written premiers asking them to match our Conservative plan to axe the tax on housing, saving Canadians thousands more. This means real relief for young Canadians desperately trying to buy a home. Will the NDP Liberals axe the tax on housing so young Canadians can finally buy a home? Yeah.